Welcome to this week's Two Men in the Middle podcast, where two men in the middle of the Midwest pontificate about news, politics, and all things current. I'm Brandon Koenig.
I'm Craig Huey.
Craig, let's get right down to it. Last night was the first Republican presidential primary debate on Fox News. First opportunity to hear from many of these candidates in a public forum, have questions asked, and I had a lot of takeaways. I was disappointed with the moderation by the Fox host, which I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. There were some surprises. You mentioned the introductions themselves, like some of the questions. The introductory question was about a country music hit song on the Billboard 100, which is a local news item this week, but is more of a cultural thing, not the most relevant thing. And what struck me is between that, the questions on UFOs and aliens, there were a lot of topics that did not receive much attention at all. There was not one question on healthcare policy, despite the fact that that ranks as a number one issue for many Americans.
Very little about the economy.
Very little about, and only this one question on climate change, and that was a question they took from a millennial voter. Yeah. And then none of the questions answered that except for Vivek, who said climate change is a hoax.
Yeah.
So this is a question that is critical for most younger Americans, those under the age of 40, and that's at the top of their policy agenda. And yet none of the questions would take it on, none of the candidates would take it on except for the one who called it a hoax. I mean, that doesn't bode well if you're trying to win the youth vote.
Brandon, to me, this was the weirdest presidential debate I've ever seen, starting with the introduction and the first kind of question. There's this song by I'm going to call him a folk artist, Oliver Anthony Edwards or something
really
like that.
Unknown, yeah.
Yeah, it came from nowhere. It's a protest song about the government. It's called Rich Men North of Richmond. And it's a folk song bitching about people in power in D.C. This is something that comes along all the time. For some reason, the right has clamped onto this and made this a little bit of a cultural totem right now. I was very surprised that they led off this debate basically with a culture warrior style question. They gave everybody the opportunity, and they kind of went right off the bat that how I interpreted that was, we are not going to get into it tonight. What we're really going to do is fart around the edges. No serious topics going to be discussed. And right from the beginning, I had kind of a bad taste in my mouth because I thought that was just in poor taste, and I just didn't understand why.
Yeah.
Second thing, too, what was the crowd doing? The crowd was obviously being prompted to applause and to applause loud. Who goes batshit crazy when Asa Hutchinson and Doug Bergman gets introduced? Nobody. The crowd, they had to be prompted to applaud because they were applauding at things that didn't make sense. They were applauding at things that contradicted each other. The crowd took away from the debate. There were multiple times that you couldn't hear what the exchanges were back and forth with the candidates because the crowd noise. And I just didn't understand.
And at one point, Nikki Haley actually told Brett Baier and Martha McCallum, you need to get control of this debate.
Yeah.
Because the crowd would not shut up.
Why? Why were there 7,000 people
and
there?
Who were these people? So some of it was not surprising because any of the candidates mildly criticized Donald Trump, which, by the way, how many minutes surpassed before there was even a question about the elephant in the room?
The first hour, they made
insane.
A conscious decision, no Trump questions.
You have a candidate that's been indicted 4 times, facing federal charges, who in 24 hours was going to be fingerprinted and get his mugshot, and we wait an hour before his name comes up?
He's the leader of the party, too, and he's not here.
Leading all the polls, yeah.
This is what the whole event made no sense to me. So I'm looking at 8 people on stage from the Republican Party at a debate where the leader of the race and the leader of the party isn't present, and nobody acknowledges that. You're also looking at a group of people. DeSantis, I saw today, is still in the second position. He's down to like 10 or 11 or 12 nationally. Everybody's 30 points at least down to this guy. Did you see any desperation on those people? Did you see any attempt to recognize we have a long way to go and I have to make some moves here? I didn't see anybody really itching to get into the fight and trying to move their position forward.
It was the same level of timidity and fear that we saw back in 2016 when a similar group of candidates were on stage with Trump. And so, it really tells you, too, that if Trump had been there, that I think we would not have expected any different behavior because these candidates are not up to it. They don't have the fight in them.
Did you think Ron DeSantis actively wanted to get into a debate and to get into a scrap? He didn't. He didn't
come
like
across
it.
with no. I mean, he failed to answer virtually any question directly, and he really just kind of floundered. And it was really remarkable to watch him get overshadowed by Vivek pretty early on. So that was something I didn't expect. I assumed because all of that debate stuff had leaked out about Ron that, either there was a calculation behind that and he was going to be extra forceful and aggressive, but we didn't really see that from him.
Nope.
Tim Scott has been touted by the donor class as this candidate who could be the alternative.
Nope.
He didn't show up that night. So it was, I think, remarkable from that standpoint. Vivek was a complete stand-in for Trump. And so what's interesting is I expected more of them to go after Ron DeSantis, who is polling behind Trump but is quickly in free fall. But instead, all of that fire ended up becoming trained on Vivek because he took on everybody essentially in the room. And, the Fox host, they basically, they provided cover for him too.
They did.
Because when he said that, all of his opponents were bought and paid for, Brett Baer used that to launch a question where he asked every candidate directly, are you bought and paid for? I'm like, are you kidding me?
Brendan,
what's going on here?
Why wouldn't the move to be to stop the debate and say, we're going to take what you just said word by word? Number one, how is Nikki Haley bought?
Yeah, what do you mean by
We're going to
that?
go individually by each individual person. Now tell me what paid for means. And if you can't, we're going to mute your mic. Because that type of attack is not, it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't get you anything.
No.
I did not understand why we were here. And I didn't understand why this group of people were here. Doug Berman, Tim Scott, and Asa Hutchinson, they shouldn't even have been there. I think Asa Hutchinson and Bergman got like 7 minutes each. Scott got a little more. So there's like 15 to 18 minutes you could put back into the debate just by getting those three off the stage. I hate to say this, but Tim Scott's a non-starter. People want Tim Scott to be a presidential candidate. He's simply not, and he should drop out before the next debate.
It was a very pitiful.
There's no reason for him to be there.
All I took away was it was almost automated. His response about his belief in God or his Judeo-Christian beliefs. That's what he kept going back to over and over again, almost like an AI response to every question. He could have come up with anything else, and he had no breakout moment.
There's just nothing there.
No.
There's nothing.
But that's a problem, too. All he does at this point is talk about his story, but he doesn't have...
I get it.
Right.
And I hate saying this, but Tim Scott, your story is you're a black senator from South Carolina. And the best...
He came out of poverty.
And the biggest thing about that story, the thing that makes that story relevant is you're black. If you were a white senator from South Carolina, you would not be on this stage. Sorry, but that's your narrative. Go with it. Go with it forcefully.
But the problem is he has nothing outside that narrative. He doesn't have any legislative accomplishments. He has no leadership really experience that he can point to. And so that's where it kind of falls apart because it's like you need something more than that. A compelling personal story of how you rose up from poverty only goes so far. Okay, how does that translate into being
slap somebody
chief
around
executive?
with that story? Take the richest. What else I get to is what calms Vivek Ramaswamy down? You just say, "Hey, Vivek, could you tell the story of how you got rich? Could you tell us that one?"
Let's learn about how about the lawsuit against your
tell
company?
us about the drug you bought that had already failed trials, and you used some VC money to buy the patent for it. Then we went out some more VC money to try to take it to market, and the company went public, and you cashed out, and you left with a big bag of money. And when the drug failed for the 5th time to pass trials and got pulled, all the investors lost their money. There's a real easy way to get to Vivek.
I'm glad you mentioned that because none of his opponents brought that up. They also did mention that there's a group of former employees that are suing his company for, and they're saying that they were pressured into trying to commit securities fraud. So how come none of his opponents brought this up? The active lawsuit, the securities fraud.
I don't think they were ready for Vivek to come out as hard as he could. And I think most people were waiting for Christie to crack DeSantis. And once that happened, that's where they were all going to go.
Craig, it's a lack of foresight, because if you've been following the polls, Vivek has been gaining on DeSantis in Iowa and some of these states.
Yeah.
So he has been on the rise. He's the candidate that's seen the most dramatic increase. And if you follow his rhetoric, he keeps saying crazy shit. I mean, 9/11 conspiracy. He is doing what Trump would normally do, right? He is throwing anything and everything against the wall to gain traction and trying to get for the base to eat up. I mean, he's really an empty suit, a phony. I think Charlie Sykes made the comparison, which I thought was funny, that he's like basically the Republican version of Tracy Flick. If nobody knows, that's a reference from the film Election, 1999, with Matthew Broderick and Reese Witherspoon about a city council election. So Tracy Flick was this go-getter, like super ambitious, like wanted to be like a political leader her entire life, and that was her life goal, is to be in politics. And if you know anything about Vivek, people close to him have said, like, he's wanted to be famous his whole life. This is all about being famous. He didn't vote for the first time till he was 30.
Correct.
All of this stuff. And, I was surprised more people didn't go after him. By the way, as an aside, I just realized that Vivek and I are basically the same age.
Yeah.
August 9th, 1985 is his birthday. My birthday is August 31st, 1985. So we're almost exactly the same age.
I mean, the obvious winners last night were Vivek, Haley, Pence, and maybe Christie did okay. DeSantis just kind of wouldn't get into the fight and held his own. So by staying pat, that was a loss for him, and everybody else just shouldn't even have been participating at that point.
So I do want to give, I was really impressed. Well, Chris Christie had some standout moments, I thought, in terms of going after Trump and saying that do we really want to normalize this behavior? Yeah. Pence actually stood out and shined in terms of talking about how he uphold his duty and oath, and was very direct and clear on that, did not waver. Although I did think it was a cop-out then when the candidates were asked if they would vote for Trump, and he was one of the ones that raised his hand. It's like,
everybody
really?
raised their hand, including Chris Christie, except Asa Hutchinson, who's the only one who didn't raise his
hand. But
then
Chris Christie seemed to backtrack. Remember, he said, I wasn't really raising my hand from that.
He went like this. I'm making a little short motion at the hip.
And I'm like, hey, what are you doing?
Christie, come on.
Everybody.
This is off-brand for you. You're a dick. Be a dick. Don't half-ass it like that. I thought that was probably the most shameful part of the debate.
Right, because it's like you did it, and then you're trying to backtrack and say you don't really mean, like, come on, just like be direct. I was really impressed by Nikki Haley. She sounded the most like a traditional pre-Trump Republican, and several of the positions she articulated. So I just want to read a few quotes on spending. She said, "The truth is that Biden didn't do this to us. Our Republicans did this to us. They passed $2.2 trillion COVID stimulus bill. You have Ron DeSantis, Tim Scott, Mike Pence. They all voted to raise the debt, and Donald Trump added $8 trillion to our debt."
True.
Which is all true. But again, it's not something you traditionally see Republicans calling out their own leaders. She also brought to the attention that 3/4 of Americans don't want another matchup between Trump and Biden, and that Trump is the most disliked politician in America. We can't win this way. And then what I like the most is she took Vivek head on in terms of like his very extreme foreign policy positions, because he wants to abandon Ukraine, abandon Taiwan.
I thought for 1 minute she was going to say, "Listen, you little shit."
It sounded like she was mad.
Real
she had
close.
the rage there. And she told him, she's like, "You have no foreign policy experience,"
and it shows. You're terrible at this.
It was so. There were a couple breakout moments, and I will give her credit, even though it was kind of ambiguous and vague. She was also trying to trot, if you paid attention on the abortion question, a middle line on abortion. If you read between the lines, she was the only candidate up there that basically said there's a middle common ground on abortion, and she took apart like efforts to go after contraception, about late-term abortions. She was really trying to stake out, saying there's a position between banning all abortions and having no restrictions, and she's right. And she also tried to bring reality to home when she was reminding, I think it was DeSantis, saying, you can't pass a national abortion ban. You have to have 60 votes in the Senate. Let's be honest about this. And we've never had 60 votes in the Senate for something like that.
Hey, if that's Nikki Haley 365 days of the next year, I'm in.
Yeah.
That was one day where she was very different than a lot of the times I've seen.
I
Nikki
agree.
Haley.
And that's been my biggest criticism of Nikki Haley, is she has been so flaky and so
if she's going to get in the fight
so much.
We welcome you. But are you in now or are you not in? Because so far you haven't been in.
Right.
And all you did was crack, like you said, Vivek, who was wanted to be cracked. That was his whole strategy. The next 2 weeks for Nikki Haley are going to be really, really interesting.
It'll be interesting to see if the donor class, if we see a shift from funding Ron DeSantis to funding Nikki Haley, particularly the big donors that are more traditional-minded, more anti-Trump, that are trying to find an alternative. Do they decide now this is the time to abandon ship with Ron and put our eggs in the Nikki Haley basket?
She's got to be calling all of Tim Scott's
I
people
believe,
saying,
yeah.
you can't be seriously moving forward with Tim Scott after last
And getting
night.
back to the audience, what I didn't understand is, so the audience ate up everything Vivek said.
Who was the audience?
And
I didn't get that.
Well, and that's what I did get too, because they also booed and hissed at any criticism of Trump. But then when Nikki Haley went after Vivek, she got some major applause. So I'm like, did they just suddenly change 180 degrees? And
the
I
crowd,
did not understand.
It made no sense.
Yeah.
I think the crowd was getting heavily prompted by the Fox producers of what they wanted them to do.
But they were also out of control at times, and that's the thing. I mean, it got to the point where, I mean, the candidates could not speak because the crowd would have shut up. So there also comes a time and point where it also makes the Fox moderators look weak because they can't control the crowd.
Nikki Haley did 3 really good things at this debate that made her the clear winner. One, she reached out and just cracked Vivek Ramaswamy for just idiotic foreign policy positions that are just dumb, stupid, and just prove he's not serious. And it was obvious Vivek Ramaswamy is not running for president.
No.
He's a Trump surrogate, basically, on the stage. So she called him out for that. Second, she called out Pence with the abortion discussion around, hey, stop saying shit that you know is never going to pass.
Right.
Hey, Pence, do you have 10 Republican senators in your pocket that we don't know about that are going to vote for abortion? How do we get for 60? If you could lay that out right now, I'll vote for you, Pence. She should have hit him even harder and said, you tell me, who are the 60? What is the plan? How do we get there? And I love the fact that she said, you stop demonizing women, that this is totally their choice. We're not giving them that choice because we're not going to be able to pass this damn thing. I thought that was extremely strong.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because the statement about women, to stop demonizing women, I think I was typing or reading a reaction when she said that. And I immediately looked up. My ears perked up, and so I caught whiff of that. I didn't know directly what it was in response to. I assumed it was the abortion issue, but I'm glad you put that in context. But that was in context of what Pence had said, right? Okay.
And I didn't understand Pence's comeback that consensus is not leadership. In this day and age, reaching a consensus would require massive amounts of leadership, Mike.
And that's the only way to get anything passed or
Correct.
enacted. You have to have consensus. I mean, that's how, governments have operated for centuries.
And the third thing I like that she hit on is she kept talking about honesty. You're not being truthful. You're not telling the full picture. You're talking about what you want. You want an abortion ban, Mike Pence, and it doesn't matter that 73%, that's irrelevant. You know better than anybody. That's not going to happen. Stop talking about it. Stop riling people up. And I thought that was a really good message.
It was a standout
that
moment.
She delivered well.
And she was the only one, I think, that was brave enough to go there, because all of the, I don't want to say all the other candidates, many of the other candidates latched on to a national abortion ban, which again goes way beyond what we saw with the Dobbs decision. And other candidates were just afraid to even articulate a position. And it got back, I immediately started thinking about how this continues to be an issue that plagues Republicans to their detriment, because they don't have any unified position when it comes to abortion restrictions or what happens now. And they were all over the place, and you could clearly see that. But again, the only one, and Nikki Haley was the only one who really staked out a moderate kind of middle-of-the-road position on that, which again is the only thing that's going to play to a national electorate. The others, I mean, national abortion bans in this environment are not going to play. And I will give credit to Martha McCallum, at least when she asked that question. She did ask it in the context of, you've had 6 states, and every one of them that have had a voter referendum have upheld abortion rights. Yeah. And so it's like many of the candidates just completely ignored that and go to their tried and true ban abortion position. That's not what the electorate is looking for.
Just come out and say, I'm willing to give up political power for my abortion stance. Just say it. Just say, I'm willing to have less political power to maintain, as a party, this moral position. Are Republicans cool with that? They must be, because they won't come up with any alternate position that seems to help them at the ballot box.
Yeah.
I just don't. Nikki Haley was the only one that looked like she was ready for a fight. She was prepared. She knew exactly what Vivek Ramaswamy was. Nikki Haley looked like she knew what everybody's game plan was and how to play into it, how to play off of it, and how to exploit it when she wanted to. And so that makes her by far, she had if there is a breakout performance in this debate, it has to be Nikki Haley.
Oh, I agree. And so the question now is, does this have an impact? I don't know if there's even any preliminary viewership numbers yet. Did any of the Trump's audience stay home, or did they watch Trump doing his Tucker Carlson interview? I mean, that's
allegedly 200 million people watched that video. Brandon, you may know this. How long do you have to just hover or look at a video on Twitter before it counts as an impression or a view?
And and that would be.
I think it's like 1.6 seconds or something like that.
And think about when you scroll through your feed, it's not active watching. I would call that passive. I mean, you're not intentionally watching the video at that point. Like if it is in your feed and it's within your screen of reference, your exposure, you see it, and that counts. So it's like, let's be honest. It's
more people in the United States did not watch that video than watch the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
that did not happen.
I haven't even had a chance to read a recap yet of the Tucker Carlson interview, as I have no idea what was said.
Before we continue with the debate, so you didn't watch any of that interview?
I did not. I have not had time to.
So you didn't miss anything?
Okay.
I don't know how Tucker Carlson prepares questions, but there was a lengthy conversation about, does Trump believe Epstein killed himself?
Oh my gosh.
They had a great conversation about flushing toilets and showers and how Trump's always mad that there's not enough water. There were a couple of other things that Tucker Carlson asked, and it's like, why? What are these questions? What are you even talking about? And Trump would give these it was a complete, I don't even know what to make of that. And I don't, those can't be having an impact, can they?
I don't
They're
think so.
so poor in quality and questioning.
Ridiculous, yeah. And the fact that it was, again, done on X as well, in terms of the platform, with all of the bad news and people that are kind of migrating away. But let's talk for a moment and just reflect on how little regard Trump must have for his own voters, because he doesn't believe he even needs to be on the stage with any opponents to make the case for another term. He thinks he is owed another term just by virtue of having been the past president, that he has to do nothing. It's despite the fact that he was rejected handily in the last national election. It really says a lot about his mentality. It also says a lot about what he thinks of his own voters, and it'll be interesting to see in time whether that connection is made and whether his voters recognize that. I don't know.
I'd be real clear. You want me to debate if I'm Trump? One of you hit 20% in the polls, and I'll debate next time. One of you add, because I think I saw a poll today that DeSantis, Ramaswamy, and somebody else is like at 12.
Is this a national poll?
This was a national poll. And I'll let Trump pick the poll, but I would come out and say, let me see that one of you actually can get within shouting distance of me, and then maybe I'll consider it. But Trump's point's valid. I'm not stepping into that. Why would I?
Yeah.
Vivek is my surrogate. He'll do my work for me. I can just sit back and watch everybody get mad and yell at each other.
But it's still a rejection of norms, because that's, we've always had.
We're past that, aren't we?
Well, I guess we are, because he skipped one of the debates in 2016. Didn't he? Remember when he did that stunt where he was going to raise money for veterans, and then he didn't give them any of the money?
Yeah. I just didn't. The Republican brand last night, in my opinion, I just kept looking at that, saying, what are the Republicans trying to tell me?
It's been reduced to a farce. If you want to see, Republicans were always known as being just kind of boring, normal, because they were always considered the adults in the room party. If you go back and watch one of the Republicans' debates, like the 1988 debate, I mean, it's like 180-degree difference night and day compared to what we saw last night, or the 2000 Republican primary debates. It just shows how dramatically the party has changed, because first of all, the candidates on all of those stages were elected officials who had years of experience in office, who were coming to the table with leadership credentials. There was no celebrity candidate at that time. There was no Vivek. There was no focus on, just phony cultural questions. It
Yeah.
was all policy driven back then. And it's like it's the opposite now. Like the policy questions are at the bottom of the barrel and get very little, if any, attention, and it's all focused on, you know, the cultural issues and the hot button, you know, and just I don't know. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around how much has changed.
Why even have debates after this presidential election?
Do we
cycle?
know who's hosting the next? I know the next debate's just a month away. It's in
I don't think
September.
it's Fox.
Okay,
I
well,
think
that's
it's somebody
good.
else.
I hope so. I hope we have. I hope there's like a mainstream outlet. I hope it's not like Newsmax either or something.
I don't. What if Trump doesn't join these debates, which I don't think he will? What are the Republicans trying to accomplish on this? We're showing you 8 people on a stage that by number and by history have no chance to win the nomination. Nobody has ever been as far ahead as Trump has been in the primary and lost. So for historical purposes and for mathematical purposes, this primary is over. What are we doing?
Well, part of this is a norm that we've always had in terms of having these types of primary debates. So it's basically like this confluence of two different realities: the reality of the presidential process norms that we've always had versus the new reality in the Trump era, where you have a candidate like Trump who is far and beyond leading his opponents, which in normal times, a normal candidate wouldn't be this far ahead either, let alone one who's been indicted and has been federally charged. So it's trying to grapple with the fact that we're trying to play out a traditional political process against the backdrop of the most atypical, abnormal candidate and candidacy. And so that's what we're dealing with. And those two things are going to be at loggerheads. They're going to be at intention for the next several months. And so there's no way around that. But from the candidate's perspective, if you're one of those candidates who are polling in the single digits, you are still hoping for something where Trump implodes. You're either hoping that there's, something happens to him and he either can't run or he's hospitalized or has a heart attack, or there's some kind of breakthrough moment in the way that one of these court cases proceeds, where there's a development that causes him to just be rendered.
An audio tape of him and the Oath Keepers planning January 6th. It would
Right.
take something to that level.
Something of that level.
But it could happen.
It could happen. But again, it's this reliance on the unusual, like an unusual event to change the dynamic of where we are in the race. And there's enough of that, even though the likelihood is very slim, where enough of these candidates think it's worth a shot to be the fallback. In case that does happen, I want to be the one who's left standing.
I get it that this is the primary, and I get it. This is an in-house party. This is not the time that you're looking to expand the electorate because you're just trying to energize your own folks. And I understand that. But the Republicans really don't. They do no brand management at all. They don't look at their product that they're producing, like this debate, and the content that they're producing with the speech of all of their candidates, and look at that and say, how is the general political audience consuming this?
Yeah, and going to react, because this will come back to haunt
them. When we get to a
them.
general, how's all of this going to play?
And sound bites in the general election.
Terrible.
Depending on who becomes the nominee. Exactly.
Just you could put together a super mix of all of this stuff just from Vivek Ramaswamy talking about, is this the Republican Party? Is this really who they are? I mean, if you can't understand the importance of Ukraine, I apologize, but you're too stupid to be the president of the United States, and we should not take you seriously.
Or this ridiculous notion, which he continues to make over and over again, that somehow we have pushed Putin into the arms of China.
No.
And I think it was Nikki Haley or one of the candidates reminded him, hey, Putin went over to meet with Xi Jinping before the Ukraine war broke out. Those discussions and that partnership, that alliance was already well underway.
Yes.
We did not push Putin into China's arms. And if anything, our involvement in the Ukraine conflict is what will deter China from any aggressive moves on Taiwan, because China is paying attention. And if we don't show leadership in pushing back against Russia, China is going to see that as an invitation to move into Taiwan because they know we won't act.
Well, according to Vivek, in 4 years, we can have all of our chip production out of Taiwan and onshored here in the United States, then after that, piss on it. Why do we care if the Chinese take Taiwan? Vivek Ramaswamy,
it's a complete lack of understanding of foreign affairs and the history. It's just, and none of that is feasible. I mean, chip production, being able to have the market on that in 4 years is not possible. And even if it was, somehow you're basically insinuating, which is a departure from U.S. foreign policy, that any geopolitical calculation should only be contingent upon our own very narrow economical interest. And if that's the case, and again, but this is from the Trump playbook, right? I mean, Trump was all about economical national interest. His foreign policy was all based on in the moment, tick for tack. So that's not unheard of. But that's also not how you run a foreign policy. It's also not how you retain allies or build alliances or have the partners at the table that you need down the line when a conflict erupts or when you need a trade deal. Transactional foreign policy is what he's arguing for, and was Trump's foreign policy. But that's it's not sustainable. I mean, we're still getting out of the hole of that type of policy from the Trump era, and I haven't heard. I wish there would have been a question to him about his thoughts on NATO. The closest that it came to that was when Vivek was saying the Europeans aren't doing enough and they need to be doing more, which I think it was also Nikki Haley who reminded him the percentage of what we're giving to Ukraine is a drop in the bucket of our entire defense budget.
3.5%.
And the Europeans have all stepped up their funding commitments and funding their national defenses as a portion of their own GDP. So all of that has happened the past couple of years. And I wish somebody had also mentioned the fact that, hey, we have Norway, not Norway, Finland and Sweden now joining NATO, again, because of this effort and our leadership, none of which would have happened. So there's a lot to point to there in terms of the successes we've had. And, it's just... It's ignorance on Vivek's part, complete ignorance.
Vivek knows two things that all successful politicians do, and these two things must be done by a Republican politician. Number one, put a smile on your face. Happy warrior, smiling, joy at all times. This was the secret ingredient to Trump in 2016 that he can't emulate in 2020.
Yeah.
He's having no fun and all joy is gone. Vivek Ramaswamy
He's always
said
smiling.
after the debate, that was a ton of fun. He is enjoying himself and he's having fun. The second thing that he's mastered is nobody wants to hear some shit about how something's complicated and you don't understand. Short, direct answers that have a conclusion, said in an authoritative style, is what people want to hear.
But don't you think he came across as too aggressive at times, too intrusive,
as an
too much of a
idiot.
turnoff? I mean, he came across as a dick, I thought, at some point, and very annoying.
But Vivek knows his audience.
Well, that's true. That's what his audience wants.
Step one is the MAGA base.
Yeah.
If you don't connect to the MAGA base, that's why Mike Pence is just wasting time, you're done. So Vivek knows what audience he's playing for, which is really Trump, but he's emulated that style to, number one, I'm going to play that happy warrior. I'm not going to take this that seriously. When I make Nikki Haley scream at me, I'm going to have a smile on my face and a little giggle because I like it, and I think other people like it too. And he's the only person that's taking that tack. Trump did this masterfully in 2016.
Well, he's emulating Trump completely in the
Very
behavior.
much so.
Did you see the one line from Vivek that received a response from Trump?
But he was the greatest president of the 21st century.
Yes.
So he beats Obama, Clinton, and Bush.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's the three.
Well, I mean, more if you're talking about the entire century, more than that.
I think he said the 21st century. So I took that as just as the 2000s.
No,
maybe I took that
you're
wrong.
talking about the whole 100 years. No, he said the 21st century. So you're talking about
okay.
From
All right.
like 1900. Well, he said 21st century, right?
I think so.
Okay. So you're right. So that would just be. I'm sorry, I was thinking 20th century.
It was a stupid line.
It was
by
a stupid
him.
line anyway, but
it was so dumb.
And it was totally playing to Trump. I mean, that was an audience of one for that line because you're just going after the ego of one man, and Trump ate it up.
But I don't understand it. And Trump laid out such a clear path for this for politicians to come behind him. People don't want to hear complicated explanations. I don't want to hear the history of Ukraine and the Soviet Union. I don't don't want to hear how difficult this is going to be. I want short, direct answers that have a conclusion that I can understand. We're going to tell Ukraine, Russia's here to stay. They get the land they've got. War over. Easy, simple, digestible, done. Vivek also has his pulse on the MAGA folks when he was telling people, I'm not here for incremental change. I'm here for revolution. That's what people want to hear. And that's what...
That burn it down mentality.
And that's what the established politicians on that stage cannot get through their heads.
Another tactic of Trump's that Vivek emulates very well is the either or proposition, right? So, we're funding this war in Ukraine and we're not focusing on problems at home.
Yep.
We're not focusing on Hawaii. Chris Christie, you have time to go to Ukraine, but that means you can't go to Hawaii and see the devastation. We're funding a forever war, trying to make that linkage to Iraq, which is also, I think, very effective because people are so sour after our 20 years spent in Iraq and Afghanistan. So calling Ukraine a forever war and then saying that it detracts from our inner cities, homelessness, crime. You're basically saying you can't chew gum and juggle at the same time is what is
like those are two different buckets of money and two totally different branches of government that deal with them.
Totally, but
one doesn't cross the other.
No, but again, it's going for very simplistic thinking, right? And just like it's either or.
This is my point. Nobody wants to hear the explanation.
No, they don't.
They just want to hear something's being taken from you and given to these people that are not you, who truly don't deserve it.
And that is the sentiment of the MAGA base because that's how Trump was elected, right? It's like they don't care about you. They're not spending money on you. They're not, it's all here. And so he did that effectively.
Next debate is September. Does Trump debate this one? The next one?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know.
I think he skips them
I
all.
would not be surprised if he skips them all.
I think
if his poll numbers don't change, he's going to skip them all.
There's just no. After, heading into Super Tuesday, which is in March, he's going to have it locked up. If he wins Iowa, basically he has it locked up. Because he's going to win New Hampshire, he's going to win South Carolina, he's going to win Nevada. So it's just, again, we're getting down to the point where it's time to start dropping out. 4 people on that stage need to go. I don't know why Doug Bergman was there. I didn't need his 7 minutes of input. Hutchinson can go. Pence can go. And they need to wipe them off the stage.
Doug Burgum is a normal Republican candidate, or traditional Republican candidate, but also he's more focused on one issue, which is energy, and that's his state.
A traditional Republican has zero chance to do anything in this primary.
By the way, Fox is hosting the second debate as well.
They are? Okay.
Yeah, it's at the Reagan Presidential Library.
Well, Trump's not going to that. That's where Megyn Kelly got on him or something. He had a bone to pick with the Reagan Library, I thought. And
it was because way back in 2015, early on in his campaign, after he announced he was one of the board of directors, somebody on the board of directors made a statement saying he was not allowed to be there because he wasn't considered a traditional Republican.
Okay.
He has held this long time grudge, like he tends to do, and so that's why he won't step foot there.
So, does anything... Well, let's go this way. Did we learn anything about anybody that we didn't know? For you, Brandon, did anything change with how you view any of these candidates? And is there anything you're looking forward to them talking about in the next debate?
Well, I don't know that I learned anything new. I think some of the candidates articulated their positions a little bit better than I've seen, and they, a few showed that they were able to take on some of the other candidates. We saw who was willing to go after Trump and who wasn't. There wasn't a lot in terms of anything new. I think, if anything, what was most remarkable is a candidate who needed a standout moment the most, DeSantis, did not have that and basically just, flamed out.
He just can't look comfortable. He just can't look normal. He just... When he tried
smiled
to smile
early on and looked very
grunting
cringy,
and he's not going to make it. He's not going to catch on. He's done.
I don't know really what there is to be gained from more of these debates.
I don't know.
I just I don't. Yeah.
I mean, Fox had fun putting it on. I guess the candidates enjoyed themselves. 7,000 people got a free night out at an arena to hoot and holler. But I don't really understand what we're getting.
I'm going to have to do a little bit more research because how many are there total before?
6.
Are there? There's that many? And I mean, because before Iowa.
Iowa's in January.
Yeah.
That can't be right.
Because we only have 4 months. 3 sounds about right. But now I'm wondering, too, if Fox is hosting the first two, if they're doing all of them, or if there's going to be any
I just don't.
diversity in terms of moderation.
No candidate, and this is where Tim Scott could come into play, could look at those people on that stage and say, you're fucking kidding me, right? The number one story here is our party's falling apart.
Yeah.
We are in disintegration mode. You keep saying the nation's in decline, DeSantis. The party is in decline. And that's what we should be talking about here. We should be openly debating what is the current direction of the party and what is the future direction of the party and how do we get here. All of this shit we're talking about from a policy perspective of what they're going to do, the party isn't capable of executing on any of that. They missed the favorite part of any Republican debate is when they force the candidates to go through, or maybe they willingly volunteer, which departments in the federal government, Brandon, are you going to get rid of? That was the only question I didn't hear last night. It's my favorite because everybody always names 3, but nobody ever asked them the follow-up question.
No.
Can you name me the last time a federal agency was taken out of existence? When was that, and why was it taken out of existence? Nobody answers those types of questions.
Yeah.
Everybody just gets a free pass on being a dum-dum in these debates.
Well, and again, the moderators don't push them either.
No.
And if we're going to talk about, the decline of the Republican Party, because Brett Baer asked a loaded question, talk about the decline of American cities, which is definitively arguable, to say the least. But like that should have been a question about the decline of the party, and there should have been some type of lead up noting that, out of the last 8 presidential elections, the Republicans have only won the popular vote one time out of the past 8. What is the party going to do to change that? Look at the difficulty they have on the congressional level. What happened to the red wave that was supposed to happen last year?
That'd been a great one to debate and hear some ideas.
Right, and we didn't see any of that. And so it's just, again, it's this like head in the sand mentality, refusal to recognize, and we get back to that same question we always ask, like, how many election losses does it take? Will it take losing again a presidential election for that wake-up call to happen? Like, what does it take for them to chart a new direction?
Brendan, I've been told reliably by the Republicans in the House of Representatives that I should start learning Cantonese because in 10 years we're all going to be taken over by China. Wasn't a single question, I don't think, last night about China, our relationship. What is your vision for it in the future? How are we going to find a way to get along with China? Because going to war with China is not viable for either one of us. That's not going to happen. So how do we get back to at least finding a way that we're not just at each other and picking at each other?
There was
all the time?
one question about China, but I'm trying to remember. It was so late in the debate. I feel like if it wasn't the last question, it was a question where they were asked to all go around and do like their 30-second closing and include China. But you're right, it wasn't a focal point. And, besides the obvious just rhetoric about how, we're not focused enough on China, like, what is your plan? How would you engage China? What would you do differently than what we're doing now?
And I would love for someone to say, we're going to set the rules. Nobody here is running for emperor. So whenever you say you're going to do something, we're going to give you an extra 20 seconds. How? How are you going to do that? How are you going to pass through 2 branches of the judicial system with that? Or the legislative. Got that wrong. How are you going to get the 60 senators? How are you going to get the majority in the House? I would love it if somebody just said, what you just said, as well as I do, you're totally full of shit. You got 30 more seconds. Can you give us any explanation of how you would do that? And we're just not going to – I just have no interest in watching a bunch of people spout out a bunch of shit that I know is not going to happen. And half of it shouldn't happen. I don't know.
Well, and the problem is with these debates, there's never any follow-up and there's never any intention to dig deeper.
No.
And so, there are some journalists in a one-on-one who do this very well. Jonathan Swan with Axios is one of those reporters
who
just
massacred Trump that day.
Yes. But again, this is what a larger critique of American media, because there are very few reporters like that who will be that aggressive. And the fact is you have to be if you're going to get anything concrete out of many of these politicians and people that are aspiring for offices. And we don't get that out of a debate when you have 8 candidates on the stage. It's all superficial. It's all at that level. It's all talking points. And it always takes me back to, I feel like we get very little out of these.
Why can't Brett Baer, after he asked, I forget the question he asked for DeSantis, but DeSantis pivots and doesn't answer the question.
Yeah.
Why when he's not done, can't Brett Baer look in the camera and say, And Governor DeSantis failed to answer that question. So if you're
Call him
scoring,
out on
if
it,
you're
yes.
scoring at home, give him one demerit for that, and just move on to the next one. I don't understand how.
Why this level of deference? Like
I don't get it.
These are people that are vying for the highest job
They're
in the
all
land.
full of shit too. All of them. That debate last night. If that's the next two debates, they can have them. I don't see why we're doing that.
Yeah, I mean, knowing now too, and especially if we're going to have the same moderators, which it sounds like. I mean, I have no interest in the next two debates.
I don't get that. So it's 7:13 East Coast time. Do you think Trump's been booked, fingerprinted, and weighed, and his mugshot's out online yet?
So yeah, an hour ago he was flying out. So the big thing in the betting world is under 273 pounds.
They let himself. They let him. They're not going to weigh him. You get to tell them how much you weigh.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's going to say like 210, 250.
Oh wait, so they're not going to actually weigh him? Okay.
I heard today that they're not going to actually weigh him. They're just going to ask him his height.
Wait,
and weight.
is that typically what they do?
I don't know, and maybe this is just somebody said that, but I would personally love to get his true height.
I wouldn't know what
and
that
weight.
is because we have not had that. And if anybody remembers when he was president and he had to do like the annual physical, his doctor, who was that ridiculous guy who's now in Congress,
Ronnie
from Texas,
Jackson?
Yeah, he would always issue a statement saying Trump is the healthiest person I've ever seen, or some kind of just like over the top ridiculous.
I mean, I usually don't care about stuff like that, but Trump's made such a deal of it. Let's be petty.
Yeah, let's be
be petty.
He will personally attack other people for their
100%.
looks and weight and everything all
That's
the time.
right. That's
So-
a great point. How many people has he called fat?
Right, and I can't remember who. I think it was Joe Klein. Somebody made this case, and you may have seen this article saying, "Is the time now to like go after Trump and be as petty to him as he is to everybody else?" There's always been this case by the opposition to Trump saying we don't stoop to that level. He's always going to go there, but like. Are we not at the point with everything that has transpired over the past 7-8 years? Like, give him a taste of his own medicine. Does he deserve the respect and deference that a normal former leader of the free world should get? Or should we recognize that he plays on an entirely different level with his own set of rules and that we should, play somewhat on that level? I don't know. It's an interesting question.
For some reason, the Republican Party has allowed Trump a completely set of political rules than anybody else. And those rules stay in place because nobody will just take him on and go through him. Everybody tries to go around him or defer to him. Nobody will say, hand in ground, I'm coming straight through you. And even Chris Christie, this was his first opportunity on the biggest stage to swing it around, and he chose not to. So even he made a calculation. Now's not the time to swing hard on Trump. So I don't understand that.
What do you mean specifically with Chris Christie not swinging hard at Trump?
Chris Christie's opening statement, his final statement, and every statement in between should be about how Donald Trump is uniquely unfit and dangerous to get back into the presidency of the United States. If we are here on a Republican debate talking about Republican issues, God damn it, there's only one issue worth talking about, and that's the orange guy who's not here. Because if he gets back into office, let me tell you something, folks. The Republican Party, we're fucked. We're
over. Yeah.
We're done for. That was the whole debate, wasn't it? That's the issue most people care about. I don't give a shit what Mike Pence thinks he can do on a tax reform because he's not going to get elected. And even if he did, he couldn't get it done anyway. So to me, it was an exercise in avoiding the person, the theme, and the real problem that the Republicans have.
Well, I agree with you, although I think Chris Christie came closest to that. I mean, he was the most forceful and several times throughout the night in terms of going after Trump and the pushing back against the attacks on the Justice Department. I can't remember, was it Pence? Somebody, it may have been DeSantis. And again, I'm forgetting who said what, but one of them who went after the quote-unquote weaponization of justice said they would fire Merrick Garland on day one. Well, no shit. Like, of course you would, because every president appoints their own AG. Yeah. And it's one of those, like, I'm like, that is the most stupid answer. Like, somehow that's some kind of, like, big news. Like, oh, I'm going to do this on day one. Like,
or everybody's going to get impeached. We're going to impeach Mayorkas. We're going to impeach Biden. We're going to impeach everybody. Is that really what you want to do before the election? Yeah. I mean, I get it.
Again, it points to the fact that you're unserious,
it does.
And you shouldn't be, on that stage to begin with.
And if Trump's in the barrel, you can't let Biden go unscathed. I understand how all of that happens. But does this help you? I still think the number one problem the Republicans have is the Republican Party itself.
Yeah.
And until they choose to deal with that, they just don't deserve to be considered. And you talk about what would get rid of Trump, it's extremely easy. Ignore him 100% of the time. Just ignore him. Don't call him. Don't talk to him. Ignore him. Deprive him of the one thing he must have, attention, and he'll go away.
And stop coming to his defense.
Yes.
Stop attacking his perceived opponents. And
correct. Like he doesn't exist. He would fold up and go away very
Trump
quickly.
thrives on attention, and he's always been an attention whore. And the candidates, whether intentionally or not, continue to give him that undeserved attention. They have since day one.
So this week, we hit the parade of folks coming in for their to get booked.
Oh, yeah, I enjoyed the mugshots.
We've seen Rudy and Jenna Ellis and Sidney Powell and John Eastman. I was so happy to see that Mark Meadows.
Rudy Giuliani, I saw a meme that had his mugshot, and it said 4 Seasons Landscaping Employee of the Year. Jenna Ellis smiled for her mugshot.
I mean, I don't... Mark Meadows.
Oh, Mark Meadows and Jeffrey Clark trying to get out of their... surrendering and getting, basically shot down by a judge.
But somehow he still managed to make it today. He still managed to make it to Atlanta. Mark Meadows did.
Well, because, that appeal got shot down.
Sure, but his appeal was, it was Clark who's like, I don't want to make rush travel plans, and I don't know if I can get there. Bullshit.
Give me a break.
Get on the plane and let's go.
Yeah.
So do you think Trump's mugshot comes out tonight?
I hope so. I don't know what the typical timeline is in Fulton County for that, because I think it differs by jurisdiction. But I mean, the sooner the better. Because again, that's going to be like, talk about merch. I mean, that's going to be all over the place.
Who owns that? Who owns that mugshot? Who do you have to license to get Trump's official mugshot on a T-shirt? I don't know.
I don't know how that works. Yeah,
is it Trump that owns it? Is it the state of Georgia?
That's a very good question. Some research has to be done there.
In my ultimate fantasy, Georgia owns that picture. They merch it out.
Oh, would that be amazing?
They pay for the expense of the trial by selling Trump merch.
There you go.
That would be just outstanding. I see Trump already dropped some of his lawyers in Georgia. He's already gotten a new lawyer, so he's already going
really? Which
through.
lawyer did he ditch?
I don't know. Somebody texted me today, and I'm like, don't learn the guy's name.
No, it's already the beginning. It's going to continue.
He won't be around for a month or two. This is another story that's starting to try to take weed on the entertainment right side. Your Charlie Kirks, your Sebastian Gorkas, people like that Trump cannot find adequate legal counsel. This is all a plot to keep the best lawyers from him. And that if he had decent lawyers, he could tear through these charges like paper. And one of the reasons why he's going to get convicted is that the government and the elite institutions
to
have
deny him
conspired,
representation
to keep great lawyers from him.
That must be some massive conspiracy where they have basically coordinated among all of these attorneys throughout the country and all of these different jurisdictions where he's been tried to basically either quiet them, pay them off, and not have them come to Trump's defense. That's remarkable.
I wish I could live 1 year of my life where I'm not accountable for anything I do.
Or say.
Just walk through it and just say, hey, I just created a big mess over there. Someone will clean that up, and just walk off. Because that's what Donald Trump does.
Yeah.
Are we have to be entering into the final phase, aren't we? I think both of us agree Trump's not going to get reelected.
No.
So we're in the last 6 to 8 months of this, it feels like, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it can't go faster. I mean, I feel like, this is the end. Trump has no recourse after this is over. I mean, the presidency is his lifeline to, he saw it as his lifeline to avoid prosecution. And, there just isn't much after this. I mean, he's totally exposed after this campaign is over.
What month does Trump drop out of the presidential campaign if he drops out at all?
Oh, that's a good question. If he were to drop out, April or May?
How many primaries has Trump won by April or May? All of them?
Well, I would say, yeah, because I would say if he's going to drop out, it'll be after Super Tuesday, so that he'll have.
How can he drop out after he just cleaned up Super Tuesday? I mean, after what I saw last night, no one's offering any serious resistance here.
No, I mean, I don't expect him to drop out. This is,
Okay.
I think, the most improbable.
Okay, so you're saying he's
scenario.
not going to drop out.
I don't think he's going to drop out.
I don't think so, because he's going to start picking up victories.
If
he's going to win states.
If he were to drop out, it would be as late as possible to cause mass chaos at the convention, because you have to remember that Trump does not care at all about the party.
No.
And if he is going to be forced out of the race or have something that forces him out, he is going to want to do the most damage possible to the party that he leaves behind. And so it would be as late as possible to basically screw them over. That's what he would do.
Does Trump win Iowa? As we stand, we're still 4
As
months
of now,
out,
yeah.
but yeah.
I mean,
And
he's leading by 27 points or higher in virtually all of the polls.
he clears the field if he wins Iowa.
I think so, because there's not much resistance in the states that follow after that. And again, I have always been the one that says, usually the Iowa winner does a portend victory. I mean, there's so many cases where, someone has won Iowa and hasn't gone on to become the nominee. But I think things are so different this year because Trump is so far ahead, I mean, in all of the polling, that, at that point, he has the momentum that you can't take away from him at that point.
Do you think anybody drops out after this debate? Do you think Tim Scott or Hutchinson or...
I think Tim Scott's going to try to hang on at least through the second debate. I do think that some of these candidates will drop out as we get into November time period. I think you'll really start to see some of these candidates drop out. But there's that third tier, which includes Scott, Haley, who will still be in, probably Christie. But yeah, I mean, somebody like Doug Burnham. I keep wondering when Pence is going to drop out because he has the no path. But I wonder if he's just going to hang on as long as possible. I don't know, at least until... I don't even know where he's getting his money from. I mean, that campaign has to be on a shoestring budget.
Yeah, I think he's the one who pulled the donate $1, I'll send you a $20
one of those.
gift card. Yeah.
There were several who did that. By the way, Doug Burnham had that send $1, $20 gift card. So did the Miami mayor, who did not make this debate.
Didn't make it. Wow, he just pissed away a bunch of money.
Yeah.
Or he pissed away a bunch of somebody's money.
Which, by the way, even if you didn't like any of the candidates, that's a pretty good investment. Donate $1, get a $20 gift card. I mean,
they're going to have to come up with some rules about that, aren't they? I mean, come on, guys.
Well, again, yes, and under normal times, that would be something the FEC would smack down. But the problem is there's not a quorum on the FEC because there has been the Congress is intentionally not funding it because they don't want them to have enforcement powers to go after themselves. Shocking,
Trump's
right?
not going to fund that. I mean, they could look into all this grifting and all this transferring of money around.
And Trump
he ain't
completely
gonna do
neutered
that.
the FEC when he was in office.
And he did that 100% intentionally.
Yeah.
Okay, Brandon, we have to talk about your vacation plans. Tell everybody where you're going for the next 3 weeks.
I am going to Poland and also doing a side trip to Germany. It's a trip I've had planned for a while.
I thought you were going to say side trip to Ukraine.
No. I'm not going to Ukraine. I don't have a death wish.
Brandon, you're not secretly a freedom fighter, are you? You're not one of these Americans that we're going to see on the news suddenly strapped up and fighting in Ukraine.
Not at all. I'm not. This is not some clandestine mission. I'm not doing side work for CIA or
you just wanted to go to Poland.
NSA. Yeah. So I have Polish ancestry. It's been on my bucket list for a long time. I've had this trip planned. And it's something I wanted to do. By the way, I do know some people who went earlier this summer, had a fantastic time, didn't run into any issues. And I will say that I'm not, even when it comes to the country, I'm not going anywhere east of Warsaw. I will say that there have been missile strikes as close as 50 miles from the Polish border, eastern border. But I am not going to be anywhere near the eastern border of Poland. So I will be mostly in the capital, center of the country, Krakow, down south, and then western Poland.
And I like most Americans, when I think of Poland, I think of Eastern European. I think of kind of dirtier, poorer, and just generally not as advanced and not as good as the U.S. I don't think that's right.
That is not accurate. I'm going to say, by the way, Poles get very offended when people call them Eastern European. They view themselves as Central European, which is also Czech people say the same thing. So number one. Number two, most people don't know that in all of continental Europe, after Germany, Poland has the largest GDP, and definitely by far in the Eastern Central bloc of countries.
Extremely modern cities.
Very modern cities, very high living standards now. So people, there's been a lot of change since the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of Soviet communism. Poland has really come into affluence. Very modern cities. So you can read almost every travel publication has now rated Warsaw and Krakow and several other Polish cities as like the cities to go to. Yeah. So these were cities that were under the radar because they're very affordable and they just didn't get the attention. But now, like, the travel boom that is hitting is just crazy by people to these places.
Are going to Poland more now?
They're going more in the last couple of years because it's been kind of this like kind of best kept secret, and it's now getting a lot of exposure because they, even despite the war, they have all of this like architecture too that's really old. Yeah. They have a lot of history, that goes back, centuries. Good food, very affordable. You can get around very easy, very modern transportation, train system. And especially like Western Poland, I'm probably going to do a weekend trip to Berlin, which from Western Poland is very easy to do in an afternoon.
Take the train?
Yep. Just train across. There's a high-speed train that goes from Warsaw to Berlin. Yeah. But yeah, the fact is, and a lot of people don't realize, a lot of major global brands have their Eastern Central European headquarters in Poland. Google does, Meta as well. So a lot of headquarters in Poland, big business capital for Europe. So yeah, there's a lot to be said there. So, and the one pushback I will also say too, if there was going to be a situation where Russia was going to be reckless, that's much more likely to happen in the Balkan state of one of the Balkan states of Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, which are much more exposed than Poland, because not only is Poland an economic and military powerhouse, which, by the way, we've increased our troop presence in Poland over the last 4 or 5 years. So we have a massive number of U.S. troops, a lot of them from Germany, that are stationed there. But Poland, that would be, again, we're talking about World War III if there were to be an incident that would happen in Poland.
Poland is begging for Russia to come across that border. They just bought 200 Abrams tanks. Then they buy like 100 or 150.
Yeah, you sent me the YouTube video.
Yeah, they also bought like 150 or 200 Apache helicopters. Poland's not messing
They have
around.
a very strong military. They're very advanced. Yeah, I mean, they're not messing around at all.
If you let Ukraine, Poland, and Finland at Russia's gone. They can't handle that. You sent me the old, what's his name, Prigozhin.
Yeah, we didn't even get to that topic. So Prigozhin, past tense was, the leader of the Wagner Group, so the private army, longtime Putin ally who started as his chef, started this private army very close to Putin. This private army is active throughout the world, not only in Russia, basically fighting the war in Ukraine, which Russia would have a chance if it wasn't for his army, but also in Nigeria, throughout the Middle East, Syria, a lot of hot spots. But Prigozhin was the one who attempted to stage a rebellion, march on Moscow, actually captured a southern Russian city, and then turned back. And then, there was this weird dynamic that happened all within the course of 2 days, several months ago, where, there was a truce brokered and Prigozhin went to Belarus. So I think you were of the same mindset, long thought that his days were numbered.
Sure.
Like, there was no way that he was going to be allowed to do this because Putin said this was treasonous and he referred to him as a traitor. And so then when this truce happened, I'm like, this is weird. And the fact that he didn't, flee as far away from Russia as possible, the fact that he stayed close by, I'm like, what is going on? He's not going to be allowed to live.
This man doesn't know the strongman rules of a coup. If you're 3/4 of the coup and you've already taken a city and you've already gone at the king, you have to see it through. That when he turned around on the road to Moscow, he was dead. He was dead that day.
Oh, completely. Putin is not good at waging a war, but what is the one thing we know he's good at? It's making people disappear. He makes people disappear very well.
What I don't understand is, I thought his main bitch was he didn't like the defense minister and the minister of war. The two dudes running the war, he was pissed at and didn't
Correct.
like. Okay, here's where this doesn't make sense. If I sit at the top of my own private army, and by army, I mean guys that back guys up against walls and beat them to death with hammers. These are the kind of guys I'm in charge of. Why didn't I just have somebody go kill one of those guys? Poison him, throw him off a building, just do standard Russian shit. Putin will, he'll be mad at me, but he's not going to kill me over that. None of this makes sense. The drive up to the highway to Moscow, the turning around because it was reported.
It was so bizarre
the
way this all happened. Yeah.
Like you wouldn't do something with that before this starts.
I feel like there's a lot more we don't know, obviously. And so, a couple days ago, it was a private jet. Prigozhin was on board with, I think, 10 other people. The jet went down on a flight between Moscow and St. Petersburg. And clearly, if there's a video out there you can watch, I mean, it like nosedives. It goes down.
How many videos of this are there? It's like they told people that's Putin's jet. You might want to watch that. Or that's Prigozhin's jet. I did the whole thing.
I couldn't help but like snicker and roll my eyes when I heard the statement about Putin issuing his condolences. I'm like,
did you hear the official Kremlin cause of the accident?
Oh, no. What was
Pilot committed suicide.
My God.
Yeah, the pilot.
Oh, it's just like the people that fall out of windows. It's interesting how that happens in Russia.
Pretty sure either somebody put a bomb in that jet or they just shot it down.
Oh, yeah.
And pretty sure Putin had to make that call himself.
So some American security analysts, there was, I forget, within the Pentagon today, there's a group of them that said there was a detonated explosion on board the aircraft.
I heard that
is
too,
the belief now. But there was also somebody who said there were puncture marks on the wings. But either way, we know this wasn't like a mechanical failure. This was an intentional downing of this.
Blatant downing.
Blatant downing.
Yeah.
You can see that from the video. You can see that from what happened with the aircraft, let alone just the history when it comes to anybody that crosses Putin.
Yeah, you can't just say, oops, he slipped and fell. This one was pretty blatant. But everybody knew this was going to happen.
Oh, yeah.
Are you leaving for Poland this week or this weekend?
Next week.
Next week, okay.
So next Wednesday, I'm flying to New York Wednesday, and then Thursday morning, my flight is from JFK direct to Warsaw.
Well, there's no way the weather in Warsaw can suck as bad as the weather in Overland Park, Kansas.
No, I think it's supposed to be like low 80s.
If this is what climate change looks like every year, we need to do something right now.
For those that aren't in Kansas City, we have now had 5 days straight of temperatures over 100 degrees, and the heat index is like 110 to 115 degrees.
It was a 118-degree heat index the other day.
And you know, don't get me wrong, I'm one of these people, I'm not a cold weather person. I love heat. I love summer, but this is too much for me. Like, I can't, like, over 100 degrees, that's kind of my limit.
Brandon, I'm having to shower every day. What the hell?
Even just being outside like 10 minutes, you have to take a shower.
I took the dog for a walk today at 5:26 in the morning.
I haven't taken my dog for a walk all week so
far.
Does
your dog just look at you like, what the hell? What are we doing? Come on, let's go. And
kind of, but he doesn't take you out. My dog is a short-haired dog with multiple layers of hair because he's part Corgi, Australian cattle dog. So he doesn't tolerate the heat very well either. No. So he'll go out, do his business, and then want right back in. Yeah. Like, he does not want to be outside. So if I try to take him for a walk, I know just when it's been like 95 degrees, we will get like a couple blocks, and then he'll stop and like not want to go further. So,
well, Poop's big thing is he passes out in the heat now. He's like 14 years old. So he'll just be walking and just fall down.
Oh,
legs
the older
go
dogs
stiff.
can't take
it's like that's why we have to go in the morning.
Well, the one positive is I think starting Saturday we're supposed to get a cool down finally, which will be nice.
It's got to break at some point in time. All right, Brandon, that's our hour. Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks, Craig.
Thanks for listening to 2 Men in the Middle. Make sure to give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Check out our website at 2meninthemiddle.com. Drop us an email at 2meninthemiddle@gmail.com or tweet at us at 2 Men in the Middle. We'll see you next week.